Why is the Chancellor Rachel Reeves in political trouble over the home she rented out after she moved into Downing Street? We will explain on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Nick sitting opposite Adam in the Newscast studio.
No Pudsey Bear today, but we are still planning what we're going to talk about for 25 hours. And shortly, we're going to catch up with what's been going on in South Korea because Donald Trump has left that big Asian summit after his face-to-face with Xi Jinping. But first of all, something quite rare has happened, Nick, which is an entire news story has gone from all the stages of emergence, confusion, clarification, change of direction, and sort of ending, all in the space between the last episode of Newscast and this one.
In between the newscasts. It's a newscast. It's a newscast news story.
Yeah, and so this is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and these stories that emerged on Wednesday night in the Mail that the house she was renting out, that she used to live in before she was Chancellor, she did not have the correct licence as a landlord from the local council, and so that kicked off this story.
It did indeed. I mean, one of the great benefits of being Prime Minister or Chancellor is you get to live in Downing Street. And that means that you get this, they're not enormous flats, but you get this flat. You don't pay any rent, although it's a benefit in kind, so there's a tax element. And then you can rent out your main property and you can claim some income on that, although, of course, you have to pay tax. And that is exactly what the Chancellor of the Exchequer did. That's perfectly normal. They all do that. That's accepted. You declare it. But as you say, Adam, there's one wrinkle that the Chancellor didn't carry out, which is that she was obliged in the particular area that she lived in, Southwark, to apply for a licence. And it's a licence that basically says you are a good, reliable landlord and this property is in a good condition. And the Chancellor didn't apply for this. And she claimed on Wednesday night that the first that she knew about this was when the Daily Mail, who got the scoop, approached her. And then the Chancellor, well, she got her skates on, applied for the licence, but wrote to the Prime Minister saying, look, I made an inadvertent error, an inadvertent mistake. I didn't know that I needed to do this. The Prime Minister consulted the independent advisor on ministerial standards, who essentially clearly ruled that there had been a problem there. But because of the speed of the Chancellor's response, because she said inadvertent mistake, because she apologised, no further action was required. And at 11:30 on Wednesday night, we were told that the matter was closed. But
well, there was then some political criticism. For example, the Conservatives saying that her position was untenable.
That's right. And Kemi Badenoch was out of the blocks first thing, raising question marks about whether the Chancellor didn't know about this licensing arrangement, because pointed out that about 10 days ago, the Chancellor posting from her Leeds, Rachel for Leeds count, because she's an MP in Leeds, praising Leeds City Council for extending this licensing process throughout Leeds, because obviously it's seen as a good thing to identify bad landlords. So evidence at 8 o'clock this morning, Kemi Badenoch retweeting the Chancellor, that the Chancellor did indeed know about this system.
And then at 4 p.m, it emerged that some new information had materialised, and it sounded like it was in the form of emails from Rachel Reeves's household that were then passed back to the independent advisor on ministerial standards. And it sounded like this was all opening up again. And then very quickly it closed down because we got a statement from the letting agent that the Reeves family had used.
Well, these emails and all the letters and everything were both good news for Rachel Reeves and they were bad news for Rachel Reeves. They were good news because what they showed was that there was correspondence between her husband, Nicholas Joycey.
Oh, yeah, because all these emails came out as well in the meantime.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was correspondence between Rachel Reeves' husband and the letting agents from sort of July and August last year, where the letting agents said, you need to apply for this licence, but we are willing to do this on your behalf. It turned out that the person who was dealing with their property abruptly resigned, and so this wasn't carried out. And the lettings agents have apologised to the Chancellor and her husband. So that's good news. It turned out that the letting agent said, we'll do this, and they didn't do it. Tick, good news. What's not so good news was that in her letter that the Chancellor sent to the Prime Minister on Wednesday night, she, as I said earlier, had said that we were not aware that a licence was necessary. And then in the light of those emails, the Chancellor wrote another letter to the Prime Minister on Thursday evening in which he said, you know that I wrote to you saying that I wasn't aware that a licence was necessary. Well, today, she wrote, the letting agents and my husband have found correspondence confirming that the letting agency said to my husband that this licence would be required and agreed, as we were saying, that the agency would apply for the licence on our behalf. So what that means, not so good for Rachel Reeves, that her husband, her household were aware of the need for this. And on Wednesday night, they said they were not aware of the need for it.
So that's the situation at 6:15. I mean, do you think this is the end of this? Has this news story reached the end stage of the cycle, or is there a bit more juice here?
Well,
I'm suspecting there might be a little bit more.
Yes, I mean, all the indications is that the Prime Minister is standing by his Chancellor. And it was interesting that we got the statements on Wednesday night, very, very late on Wednesday night. I was told by a minister the reason why they wanted to move so quickly is they did not want a question mark over the Prime Minister as the markets opened. They wanted absolutely clarified because they were worried if there was a question mark over the Chancellor that our markets would not look favourably on that.
And the cost of government borrowing would go up, like when Rachel Reeves was seen crying. Yeah,
because it wouldn't be good for sterling. So all the indications are that the Prime Minister is standing by his Chancellor, but the Conservatives have been piling a lot of pressure on this. And the element of what came out on Thursday evening that's not such good news for the Chancellor, I'm willing to bet that I think the Conservatives, well, they might have something to say about that.
Yeah, the discrepancy between what she said one night and what she said the next night about the true position. I mean, it's been quite a week for Rachel Reeves already because she started off the week in Saudi Arabia basically saying, oh, there's going to have to be some tax rises in the budget, which all independent observers of the government's financial position had predicted was going to be necessary. But up until that point, politicians weren't doing. And then a few days later, at Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer did not repeat his famous phrase about the manifesto pledges to not raise taxes.
Well, clearly it's going to be a really difficult budget for Rachel Reeves on the 26th of November for one very, very simple reason. When Rachel Reeves delivered her first budget last year, she said, a lot of tax rises in this budget because they raised national insurance for employers, not employees. So they said that wasn't a breach of the manifesto pledge. Yeah. So they would say not on working people. But when she did that, she said, that's it. I'm not going to have to come back for big tax rises, I think it was, for the rest of this parliament. And that now is exactly what Rachel Reeves is going to have to do. She's going to have to do it because the fiscal hole is a lot bigger than the Chancellor or indeed anyone had thought it would be a year ago. So difficult stuff coming up, which is, yes, it looks like tax rises and spending cuts. So the phase that we're in now, you know, this great Westminster phrase which comes from cricket, they're rolling the pitch. They're rolling the pitch. They're preparing the ground for it to be a really, really difficult budget. Lots of speculation that the Chancellor may have to breach the manifesto pledge with a rise in tax, because famously the manifesto said no increase in income tax, no increase in VAT, no increase in national insurance. All the talk is, and indeed the expectation amongst Labour MPs, is that there will be an increase in income tax. Now, this rolling the pitch, it's going to be really difficult. This rolling the pitch, might have to raise income tax, is because they may raise income tax, but it might also be that she doesn't raise income tax.
And so she can look like she saved the day.
It wasn't that bad.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Nick, thank you very much. And if in 2 weeks' time we could do exactly the same sort of analysis, but 2 hours longer, that would be great.
Great, brilliant, 3 a.m.
Now, as promised, let's catch up with goings-on in South Korea, where Donald Trump, the US president, has just departed after a meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, APEC, where the key moment was his face-to-face meeting with President Xi Jinping of China, an encounter that we previewed in quite a lot of detail on the previous episode of Newscast, so we should probably find out what happened in their tit-for-tat over tariffs, soybeans, chips, and the ingredients for fentanyl. various combinations of which go in various directions between China and the US. So let's check in with somebody who's had a very long day and a very long week. It's our China correspondent, Laura Bicker, who is in Busan, where the meeting was taking place. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Adam. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And Faisal joins us on the line as well. Hi, Faisal.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Laura.
So, Laura, just explain to us where we are in the timeline of Trump and Xi Jinping's meeting, which happened a few hours ago.
So, President Trump has left South Korea. He did his fist pump, which looked to him like it was victory. He left on Air Force One. We had very few details about what was agreed, and then on Air Force One, he's told us that there have been many agreements, that it's been a great agreement, tremendous, and he rated it 12 on a scale of 1 to 10. He said that there had been an agreement on soybeans, that China was going to buy lots of soybeans, and that was going to make farmers in the United States very happy. He said there was agreement on rare earths, and that China would release that chokehold on rare earths, and they would begin to flow back to the United States again. And he said that they're pretty much close to a trade deal. The Chinese side, well, let's just say they were less effusive in the way that China's releases tend to be. They called for a consensus to be reached and called on both sides to continue talking to get the details of a deal.
So much less gung-ho on the Chinese side.
Yes, when it comes to the releases from the Chinese side, we kind of don't expect them to get extremely excited by each meeting. But yeah, this one, I would say they're hedging their bets. I think the other thing that we need to point out is this supposed deal that we've yet to see the details of is only for 1 year. So it's going to have to be renegotiated year after year after year.
Faisal, give us some things to think about the outcome of this meeting then.
Yeah, that last point from Laura about 1 year is essential. This is a truce. It is not the end of the trade war, but this is a really important moment where you have the world's number one and number two economy kind of at loggerheads on that fundamental trade. This is just an absolutely almost existential fundamental fragility injected into the whole world economy. And what we've had is a series of cliff edges where they've tried to work out essentially not just who is more powerful now, but who is going to be more powerful, whose strategies have worked. And they are like rutting stags, kind of like, looking at each other, trying to work out, well, this is your point of weakness and this is my leverage. And I'm going to sort of feign in this direction and I'm going to go in the other direction. And so the process over the past 9 months since the famous blue board that went up at the White House Rose Garden from President Trump has been quite instructive in what it says about the world, what it says about the state of power, and therefore where the world economy has been. And I think and it's also revealed just how interconnected these two blocks are. I call them countries. It's kind of it's a bit more than that. They're the two absolute hyperpowers of the world. And the question is who has the most power? And I think if you look at one thing, there's many things to draw from this, and we'll talk about more in a minute, but there's one thing I would do is that what has been revealed from what I can see economically is that China has been unafraid to at least threaten responses that are stronger than what the US action has been. So in this case, it was the threat to pull the export of rare earths, which caused a huge, these are materials, they're not obscure, actually. They're not that rare, actually.
Yes, it's a misnomer.
They are. They're difficult to mine, but they're absolutely essential for high-tech manufacturing all around the world. And 3-4 weeks ago, I was in America with Scott Bessent, who was in the room at the talks a few hours back, the US Treasury Secretary, just when this threat had been made. And the Americans were furious, trying to enlist the whole world against what they said was a Chinese plot, essentially to take over the world economy and to control the world economy. And this was of great concern. And in essence, if I could boil it down to one thing, you had America saying, you can't have our advanced chips if you're going to create industries that essentially outcompete us. And China said, well, you can't have the rare earths. that are actually common across the world, but only we have invested for 20 years to get them out of the ground
buy them all
and
up,
make them
yeah.
exportable.
And Laura, what's your understanding of what's been agreed on chips?
So I think we've heard that China's going to be allowed to have a conversation with NVIDIA, that they will be allowed to purchase some of advanced chips, but not the most advanced chips, because I think when it comes to what China's really looking for is they're looking to advance what they call their high-tech economy. China actually currently has more robots than any other country combined. And this is part of their high-tech push to try to be a world leader in artificial intelligence. Now, of course, when it comes to the great world competition, great global competition, the United States has said, hang on a second, we should really restrict the sale of our advanced chips. China makes these chips themselves, but they're not as advanced as the ones made by the American company NVIDIA. So I think they're allowed to have a conversation, but it will be overseen by American officials. So I think what President Trump is trying to do, what the administration is trying to do, is say, look, we can allow these sales to go through, but we will oversee it. In the same way that the Chinese are saying, yep, you can have our rare earths, but we will oversee it. So I think it's been, again, even when it comes to making a deal, there's still that tit for tat.
And Faisal, I mean, I always remember that conversation you had with Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the big chip-making giant. I mean, what was he thinking about all of this when you spoke to him a few weeks ago? Because he was here for the big Trump state visit.
Yeah, he was. These things are really interconnected. He is obviously close to Trump, and Trump called him out at the state visit in a good way. But when he spoke to us, we pressed him on the China issue. I mean, obviously, they could sell and have sold unbelievable amount of chips, as Laura just mentioned, into the Chinese economy. At the minute, they're booking forecasts of zero revenue into China because of this controversy. Now, apart from that, they are selling truckloads of this stuff around the world, and they've just become worth $5 trillion. And that is a not unrelated story. And so what you're seeing here is, can the US, what actions are the US willing to take to slow down China's development plan, high-tech development plan, and potential supremacy in some of these areas of manufacturing, and where are they trying to protect that supremacy for the US or win some of these things back? Actually, I think there's another point here which is really interesting, which is what you're also seeing is how can we harm and leverage the other economies' problems? So when I was talking to officials in the US, they were saying, listen, you've got to look at the Chinese economy, the housing market, they're sort of bailing it all out. It's terrible. They're under a lot of pressure. They're going to have to go for a deal. Meanwhile, the Chinese are saying, well, we're going to stop buying soybeans. That's going to be a political problem for farmers. Doesn't want that coming into the midterms. And then not just that, the Chinese have there's two things. They have this sort of assumption that if the US tariffs China's imports, eventually that inflation will show up, damage the American economy, damage consumers, damage living standards, and be problematic, and that Donald Trump will eventually want to avoid that. So you have this sort of game going both ways about who's damaged. That's why we've got this truce, but it'll work back up again in a year's time.
And Laura, do you think when it resumes in a year's time, if it does resume in a year's time, it'll be over the same things, or will it be different things?
So there's a couple of things I would say to Faisal just there. He's totally right. Washington tried to push on China's pressure points. But what I would say, having spoken to both sides, is that Washington appears to have overestimated both the economic pain being felt in China and also the amount of pain that Chinese companies were willing to take when it came to these tariffs. Remember, President Xi isn't facing an election every 4 years. He doesn't have to pander to an electorate in the same way that he is pushing on Washington's pressure points with regards to soybeans. If you're sitting in a Republican state and you're watching your farmers desperately asking for China to buy your product, then you're really going to pressure Donald Trump to make a deal. President Xi doesn't have those pressures. He just has to hold firm. And that, I think, is what he's done this time.
And Faisal, I do not include you in this category, but does the average British person underestimate how important this is to the British economy?
It's absolutely essential. These two countries are the hinges of the world economy. And if there's fundamental tension and breakdown in their relationship, it affects everybody, and in quite bizarre and different ways. There's a more geopolitical point, which is, a lot of this this government wanted to sort of, if you like, go down the middle road with China. They want the investment. They've let in the Chinese electric vehicles without tariffs, which most other G7 countries have not. Indeed, there was a launch, an extraordinary launch from the Geely company trying to push into the UK and sell as many cars as possible. And then you had all that controversy, obviously, over Spygate. If the Americans are kind of in a fundamentally sort of more relaxed mode, like, where does that leave the UK's view that we need to be constructive economically with China, even get investment, even try and persuade these Chinese electric vehicle companies to build factories in the UK? Is that the strategy? I don't know. They're trying to be quite vague. Post-Brexit, like, can we just ally with the American bloc? And if the American bloc is not going against China in quite the same way, does that change the picture a little bit? It's also really important, I think, in terms of the general strength of the economy. And I think one underrated fact here is that we would have expected from the totality of the American trade war for the US economy to have been hit, and for that to have been some sort of restraining factor. And it has been a restraining factor at various points in this journey over the past 9 months, when this has looked to go worse than expected. But I do think, bringing it back to NVIDIA, you have this weird thing. You have the weight of the instability caused by the trade war and just constant chopping and changing. But you also have this astonishing kind of build-up of the American stock market, partly because of companies like NVIDIA that's happening at the same time. And it sort of balanced things off and allowed the circle to keep on turning. And I just wonder if we're just going to be at this stage now, not just with US, China, but with like the whole world, like for 2 or 3 years. It's going to be kind of constant attrition as a form of leverage, a sort of rolling art of the deal going in all directions from the Trump White House.
And Laura, is there anything else from this big bilateral, as it's known in the trade, that you want to bring to our attention?
When it comes to these two superpowers, this is just a start. It is, as we keep talking, a tactical truce. It is not a trade deal. I think the thing that really kind of struck me was the different styles of both leader. You're looking at Donald Trump eager to interact with the press, answering questions, and the steadfast Mr. Xi sitting there, really not showing any signs of giving anything away with his poker face. And this, just talking about NVIDIA, actually the CEO is here at APEC while the Chinese are here. So we're wondering whether or not there's going to be talks on the sidelines of APEC while both are here to talk.
Well, Laura, thank you very much. I know it's quite a late night for you, so we appreciate you staying up to talk to Newscast.
No problem. Lovely to talk to you, Adam.
And Faisal, just last question for you. You said that you went to that launch of the electric vehicles by Geely, the Chinese company, and you said it was an extraordinary launch. What is that? The canapes? Like the lighting? Like the models displaying the cars?
There's an episode of Mad Men where in the 50s, the Japanese car industry, or motorbike industry as it was then, suddenly becomes mass, but it's created. And I was really brought back to that moment. The Chinese are now confident enough in their electric vehicle technology, which again, they have decided to go for 20 years ago and developed all the supply chains. They got technically good, but now they think that they can build a brand and sell the brand into the UK. And so I thought it was that sort of confident push that I thought was extraordinary. And the truth is the Chinese electric vehicles are rapidly growing in the UK. I think it's like 1 in 9 now vehicles is from China. Not many, some of these brands people don't know are from China. So it's a fundamental change. And the UK, in terms of tariffs, have waved these cars in. And so this is rather interesting. The Chinese have noticed that. And I think a fascinating question that I put to cabinet ministers privately when I see them is like, what would you want a Chinese factory, EV factory here in the UK? That would be a great win. It'd be the equivalent of Nissan from the 80s. Or do you not want them? Like, where do you draw the line in this relationship, which is so complicated, especially when the top two's relationship, which seems very problematic, suddenly is fine.
For a year.
Yeah. So how do you draw? So in a way, this isn't. So this is a testing ground. And the dilemma, of course, is with net zero. They can provide net zero transportation at a cheaper price, but they're from China. And what does it do to our domestic manufacturing? We've said, come on in, and they have come.
Faisal, thank you very much both for your analysis and for your very dad-like TV recommendation of Mad Men. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. But just a reminder, we are looking for your voice notes to help us get through that 25-hour podcast-a-thon we're doing in the middle of November. Remember, here are the ground rules. We want you to tell us how long you've been listening to Newscast, when you listen to Newscast, and any memorable moments from Newscast past that have lodged in your brain. You'll sort of be able to guess that there's a bit of a time theme running through there. And then you can send them to us in whatever form you fancy. As I said yesterday, some people have been doing it in song. And the email address is newscast@bbc.co.uk. And the WhatsApp number is 0330 123 9480. And don't worry, you don't need to do some kind of like giant masterpiece. It'll just be nice to have you keeping me company virtually as we do our 25 hours of podcasting in a couple of weeks' time. And that's all for my 30-ish minutes of podcasting today. We'll be back with another newscast very soon. Bye-bye.